Parsha is called Kdoshim, Kdoshim Tiyu. The mitzvah is to be Kadosh, be holy. And the introduction to this mitzvah is Daber Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael. Usually it says Daber B'nei Yisrael, speak to Klal Yisrael, Daber Alehem. Daber Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael is a rare reference when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling Moshe to speak to Klal Yisrael. Why in this parasha, in Kdoshim, does the parasha start off with Adas B'nei Yisrael to the entire community of Klal Yisrael? What does it mean, Kdoshim Tiyu? Be holy. It's famous, the Ramban, because Rashi has his pshat, the Ramban argues on Rashi, and the Ramban famously says that a person who has taivas, a person who's always looking after his material desires, in fact, he can look at the entire Torah, keep every single mitzvah, dot all the I's and cross all the T's, not be over any averes, and still completely be involved and entrenched in pursuing all of his material and physical desires. This person is called a novel b'rishus HaTorah, a disgusting person within the permissible confines of the Torah. It's called a novel b'rishus HaTorah, and he's not violating any of the 612 mitzvahs. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu added 613. Kdoshim Tiyu, be holy. Don't do that. Don't be a person who keeps the entire Torah but's constantly running after his own taivas and his own desires. Mesilas Yesharim in Perek Yud Gimel, very famously, when he goes up the ladder of Ziras, Rizos, of Nikias, he comes to the Madrega of Precious, and he talks about good Precious and bad Precious, because we have conflicting Ma'amorei Chazal. On the one hand, Chazal say, it's a Gemara in Yerushalmi says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes with a complaint if a person starts adding on himself prohibitions that are not listed in the Torah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, what? I didn't give enough Isurim. You have to add more Isurim to what it is. You do what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to enjoy the world. You're supposed to partake from the world. Don't start being pirish from things in this world. On the other hand, the Torah says Kdoshim Tiyu, like the Ramban says, you do have to be pirish. So what's called good precious and what's called bad precious? And the Ramchal explains, a person has to be a normal functioning human being. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a person as a physical being. A person has to eat, a person has to sleep, a person has to partake in this world in order to function normally. A person who does less than that, excessively fasting, excessively being pirish from other pleasures of this world, that's called a person who's a bad pirish. That's not what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants a person to use this world to be a normal, healthy, functioning human being to serve Hashem. But then a person can do even more than that. He doesn't have to eat just breakfast, lunch, and supper. He can have breakfast, he can have a snack between breakfast and lunch, he can have a steak every night. He can be completely entrenched in his taivas, and he's not being, that's Kdoshim Tiyu. That's the good precious. There's a bad precious, and then there's a good precious. And the Ramchal himself points out that when a person is involved in doing precious, he's actually doing more. It's considered in a certain way of the Fnim Shuras Hadin, because like the Ramchal says very clearly, the first few madregas of Zehirus and Zrizos and Nikias are to make a person into a tzaddik, a person to keep the entire Torah. And then from that point on all, a person has to strive to become a chassid, somebody who does more than what the Torah says. And that's where the meat of precious kicks in. That a person has to do more. And how does a person know what's called good precious and what's called bad precious? So based on this, the Netziv, and Hamik Dover doesn't quote the Ramchal, but he says very similar words. Tziv says that's why it says here Al Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael, because this is not something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can write in his Torah exactly what he has to do. You should eat 5 grams of meat a day and not 6 grams. No, because for some people 5 grams is too much. For some people it's too little. Every person has to know what his precious, what his good precious is and what his bad precious is. What's called living normally, what's called living a normal, fulfilling life, and what's called being excessively involved in your taivas. That's why it's El Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael, to the entire congregation, to the entire Adas B'nei Yisrael. For every person, he has his precious that's good, his Kdoshim Tiyu, be holy. The mitzvah is for every yid. But how to apply that mitzvah for every person, it's very, very unique and very subjective. That's why the mitzvah of Kdoshim Tiyu is for everybody. But each person has to realize where he is in this Adas B'nei Yisrael. Who is he? What kind of person he is? And he has to apply the mitzvah of Kdoshim Tiyu to his own personal growth. Shabbos.